Welcome everyone, this is Andres Restart, and this time we're talking about a Summer Nintendo Direct, because it will no longer be called the E3 Nintendo Direct since E3 has officially been cancelled. So with E3 being cancelled, something that we've gotten almost every single year where there's usually been an E3 Nintendo Direct, what do we get instead? Do we still get a Nintendo Direct in June, a big Direct of the E3 style? Or do we get something else? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, before we jump into things, let me first very quickly talk about my social media. You may see a few different things here on screen. You can check that all out. It is linked in the description below. And of course, if you like what you're seeing here, you can subscribe or perhaps consider joining as a member. So yes, E3 has officially been canceled. It is no more, at least for this year. Maybe it'll happen in the future, but this is not a good sign for things to come for E3, so a lot of people are a little upset, a little disappointed, because there have been so many things that have come from E3 that we've gotten so excited about over the years. But usually around this time, regardless, we get a number of announcements from different companies. And even when we take a look at Nintendo themselves and the Nintendo Direct, the Direct itself is already a bit of a distancing from E3. Way back when, before the Nintendo Direct, Nintendo used to do live conferences at E3. Some of the most coolest moments ever in gaming, in my opinion, happen at these live conferences. One that comes to mind was the Twilight Princess reveal. At the time, it wasn't called Twilight Princess, but at E3 2004, it was a very epic initial showcase for the game, and it was very exciting. There was this huge ovation from the crowd, cheering and cries. It was amazing. That is no more. And it has been no more for quite some time, and we've had the Directs instead, and there have been amazing things from the Directs that are different, but that's what we've been getting. Point is here, the Nintendo Direct was already a distancing from E3, and this was done so Nintendo could control their message a bit more, and they've been very successful since. So, in a way, not really a big deal. You could argue that E3 has been cancelled, Nintendo can just have a Direct, as they have been doing. But Nintendo has still supported and participated in E3 in various ways. They still have these E3 branded Directs. They have still had the Nintendo Treehouse events at the actual physical locations, and there are still things to do at E3 for Nintendo. In more recent times, since COVID and all, that hasn't really been the case. There were Treehouses, but they were all done digitally, and then still there was a Direct, but there was still that E3 association last year. But this year, now that E3 has officially been cancelled, they can't associate themselves with E3 because it's gone. But what's interesting is that there is something that is similar that happened last year that may be taking the place of E3 this time around, and it's called the Summer Games Fest. So last year there were a lot of companies involved in the Summer Games Fest that were not involved with E3. Nintendo and Microsoft were involved with E3. Interestingly, Microsoft, Xbox, are now involved with Summer Games Fest along with other big companies like Blizzard, Capcom, EA, Sony. So really the only other big company that hasn't made like a big announcement that comes to mind here when we take a look at this list is Nintendo. So the question is, will Nintendo also partner up with Summer Games Fest and basically make this effectively the new E3? And that point is hard to say because it's Nintendo. They can be very cautious about who they partner up with, how they handle their messaging, how it's being represented or presented to the world. So I'm not entirely sure that they will be partnering up with Summer Games Fest. I'm not saying they won't. I'm not even saying it's unlikely. I think there's a good chance that they do, but there's also a chance that they don't and they just do their own thing. Nintendo does like to march to the beat of their own drum. So perhaps they will not even associate themselves with the Summer Games Fest and they will not be a part of this substitute for E3. Maybe they will, as I said, and if they do, perhaps it'll be basically the same thing. There will be a Nintendo Direct associated with the Summer Games Fest, and there will be Treehouse events associated with the Summer Games Fest, and they'll all be lined up with the schedule and all. And it'll basically be just like E3, just with a different name and brand. So for us who are consuming this information from home, it won't make much of a difference, if that's how things go down. Because again, it's possible that Nintendo does not associate themselves with Summer Games Fest, they do not partner up, and they do things differently. If they do things differently, could that mean we don't get the information we want when we want it? You could argue that because there's not going to be like a big sort of E3 like event, Nintendo doesn't have to have like a big amazing direct with a whole bunch of epic announcements like they usually do. And even if they are planning something like that, that doesn't mean they have to do it exactly at the beginning of early June when we usually see E3 or now Summer Games Fest. So maybe regardless of what happens, we still get that big amazing presentation from Nintendo, but it doesn't happen when we expect it. Maybe we have to wait a few more weeks, maybe a little bit later into the summer. That's a possibility. But if I had to bet, if I had to give you a guess or a prediction as to what's actually going to occur, I'm not sure if Nintendo will brand themselves as Summer Games Fest. They may, but I do think regardless they will be giving us that information around the same time they usually do. Why? Well, Nintendo's had some success with having a major earlier direct, February usually, and then they have the E3 direct early June, and then they have another major direct in September. 3 major directs throughout the year. Why would Nintendo go away from that just because E3 is no longer a thing? Everything they've been doing technically happens outside of E3, they just do some sort of marketing or branding to associate themselves with E3. So, from their perspectives, why should they do anything different? Not to mention, the Nintendo Directs aren't just about Nintendo products necessarily, there's also a lot of third-party stuff. A lot of third-party companies that have partnered with Nintendo are expecting certain announcements to happen at certain times, and if the rest of the world is making announcements around early June, Nintendo will probably also have their Direct around then because they partner up with third-party companies that are expecting to make their announcements around that time. So for that reason, I think Nintendo will not be holding back the Direct for a little bit longer. They may, because again, at the end of the day, it's Nintendo and they do what they want, but I think more likely we will still be getting an early June Nintendo Direct. Maybe it doesn't happen on a Tuesday, maybe it doesn't happen exactly in line with everything at Summer's Games Fest, but I still think we'll be getting a major presentation around that time, along with Nintendo Treehouse. This marketing and messaging has been effective for Nintendo. They're not going to stop because E3 has been cancelled. All of their stuff has been sort of outside of E3, just associating with E3. So I don't really think we should be worried. I think the major difference here is simply the branding of what it will be. It will not be an E3 Nintendo Direct because E3 is no longer a thing. It will simply be the Summer Nintendo Direct or the June Nintendo Direct. Maybe they even give it a special name, or if Nintendo does partner with Summer Games Fest, maybe it will be the Summer Games Fest Nintendo Direct. That is also a possibility. In terms of content, I expect it to be basically the same. There is a consideration that perhaps Nintendo won't go as hard and have as many amazing announcements at this Direct as they would other Summer Directs, but I'm thinking that they probably will, because why would they go away from what they usually do that's been so effective for them? So basically, outside of a slight name change and maybe slightly different timing, I think pretty much everything from a Nintendo perspective will be about the same for us Nintendo fans this June. But what do you guys think? What do you guys make of this Summer Nintendo Direct or this June Nintendo Direct? Do you think it's happening? Do you think it's basically going to be the E3 Nintendo Direct we've come to expect every early June? Or do you think it'll be a little different? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways everyone, this is Andres Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching. I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.